Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The UK has negotiated its first entirely new trade deal since leaving the EU. Downing Street says the pact with Australia will make it easier to sell British products like cars and Scotch whisky down under. But farmers here have warned the deal could undercut them on price and standards. Our global trade correspondent, Darshini David, has the details.
Striding towards better opportunities for some.
Are you selling out British farmers, Prime Minister?
Heading inside to slash import charges and restrictions, sweetening a deal they claim promises treats for exporters and consumers, and for under 35s, more work opportunities abroad.
This will be good news. It will be good news for British car manufacturers. It will be good news for British services, for British financial services, and it will be good news for, I hope, for agricultural sector on both sides.
Our economies are stronger by these agreements. This is the most comprehensive and ambitious agreement that Australia has concluded.
Farmers are less sure. Sealing a deal in months means compromise. Despite a promise of safeguards for 15 years, they fear they'll be undercut by much larger Australian counterparts.
We are not competitive with Australia now. They are massive producers. They can produce at scale. They have a very small home market, so 25 million people. We have 70 million people. So we're very much a prized market on the world stage.
I opened that corner gate.
Robert Mackenzie owns large cattle farms in New South Wales, selling Angus beef around the world. Australian farmers are allowed over 20 chemicals, some pesticides, hormones and practices banned here. But they say they aren't taking advantage of allowances at present. We won't be swamped by cheap meat.
Our product will just be a point of difference that it's from Australia. Not everyone will want it. Our product is going to be a little bit more expensive. It'll be for that high end. And we truly don't believe that it'll be affecting the UK farmer in any way, shape or form.
Australian exports could surge by 80%, but it's so far away that's equal to just 0.1% of UK imports. Ultimately, this deal could add just 0.02% to our nation's income. However, the hope is that this could be a pathway to an alliance with a group of trans-Pacific nations. Between them, they account for 8% of our exports, a fraction of what we sell to the EU. But the ultimate dream is that perhaps other nations could join that group, for example, the US or Korea. But they too would want more access to our markets. That's what concerns farmers. We've yet to see the detail of this deal. We already know it'll save British households only about £1 a year. How much might it cost others as global Britain looks to forge a new path? Darshini David, BBC News.
To the day's other news, and Britain and Australia have agreed the first post-Brexit trade deal to be negotiated from scratch. Downing Street declared the tariff-free agreement would make products like whisky, cars, confectionery cheaper to sell. Some farmers fear they could be undercut by cheaper imports and lower standards. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison was at 10 Downing Street to seal the deal with Boris Johnson. Our business and global trade correspondent Paul McNamara reports.
Farming on a vast scale in a vast country. Anna Creek in Australia, a cattle farm the size of Israel. And after today, owner Wayne Williams hopes more of his meat will be Britain-bound.
Any free trade agreement with the UK will be good for Australia and anyone on the land.
Aussie excitement on the farms and Downing Street.
Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison inside Downing Street.
The UK's first post-Brexit trade deal will benefit Australia by 1.3 billion Aussie dollars.
The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison strolled into Downing Street this morning to make history. The first nation to strike a post-Brexit trade deal with the UK completely from scratch. But a good deal for him means possible losers here.
Will you be putting UK farmers out of business, Mr Morrison?
This is a deal in principle. The finalised agreement will be published in the coming days. And today, details were a little thin.
And the broad outlines of the deal, as you can imagine, is that you give us Tim Tams, we give you penguins, you give us Vegemite, we give you Marmite.
This is the most comprehensive and ambitious agreement that Australia has concluded. Movement of people, movement of goods, movement of services.
An obligation for young Brits to do farm work when extending visas has now been axed, controversial with farmers there. And new import rules controversial with farmers here. Under the deal, there will be zero tariffs and quotas on the import of Australian meat and other goods. But there will be a 15-year transition period, including some restrictions, to help farmers here adjust. Oz, though, could be the big winner. A study last year said, quote, full tariff liberalisation would see British exports rise by around 7%. But Australian exports to the UK could soar by more than 80%. And then there are standards. In Australia, livestock can travel on road trains like this without water for 48 hours. In the UK, transport is limited to 8. The government says this deal will not compromise standards. Farmers here disagree.
This trade deal, and it's the first of many, is going to change the way we farm. It's going to put people out of business. It will change the British countryside because we cannot compete with the scale of Australian farming.
That fear is misplaced, say the Prime Ministers of both countries.
Who got the better deal, you or Boris Johnson?
Right deal for both countries.
In terms of cold, hard cash, this trade deal might be more to the Australians than it does to the UK. Early estimates say it might add just 0.2% to the UK economy over more than a decade. But its true value might be more symbolic than financial. A marker to the rest of the world of how we look post-Brexit. What compromises is the UK willing to make to strike trade deals? Just how global is global Britain? The government has made no secret that today is a potential gateway to other deals, and the major goal is still a free trade agreement with the US. But from now on, a fear for farming. Today, market access for Aussie farmers was put on the table. Why would any other nation accept any less?
One of the central arguments put forward by those in favour of Brexit was the idea that any loss in trade would be more than made up for with new deals struck around the globe. Today, the government agreed the first of those with Australia. It will, we are told by the government, add at best 0.02% to the size of our economy in the long term. But if it's short on size, it's big on symbolism.
They walked down the aisle and then tied the trade knot in the garden of number 10. Britain has struck its first trade deal since leaving the European Union, and it is with Australia. They give us Tim Tams, we give them penguin biscuits. We're told it's a win-win.
So for Northern Ireland, Northern Irish machine tools, this will be good news. It will be good news for British car manufacturers. It will be good news for British services, for British financial services, and it will be good news for, I hope, for agricultural sector on both sides.
Our economies are stronger by these agreements. This is the most comprehensive and ambitious agreement that Australia has concluded.
When the deal comes into force at the end of next year, Britain will find it easier to sell cars and Scotch whisky to Australia. And Australia is hoping to sell more beef, lamb and wine to us. Consumers are being promised more choice and lower prices. The government calculates that removing tariffs and quotas on goods will save British consumers £34 million a year. That works out at £1.22 per household, which is very modest, as are the economic benefits. The government estimates the deal may add just 0.02% to our GDP. Countries tend to trade more with countries that are closer, so the government can sign trade agreements with Australia, China and the United States, and those deals will help increase trade with those countries. But the government's own analysis suggests, even cumulatively, those deals are highly unlikely to make up for the trade we've lost with the EU as a result of Brexit. The trade deal will allow young people to live and work in Australia with even greater freedom than they currently enjoy. And although it will allow Australian farmers much better access to UK markets, imports of hormone-treated beef, which is common in Australia, will remain banned.
Any free trade agreement with the UK will be good for Australia and anyone on the land.
That's not the view held by farmers here. They're concerned the removal of tariffs will leave them struggling to compete on price with Australian imports, and they warn that food standards may slip.
It is a worry because a quick deal now could have long-lasting repercussions. We produce some of the best, safest, highest quality of beef in the world at the moment, and I think it's dangerous that we could let something in just because it's cheaper. We might be laying ourselves open for something.
The Prime Minister of Australia, Your Majesty.
Scott Morrison was granted an audience with the Queen today. Britain is on a charm offensive. The hope is that this trade deal will be the first of many. The glittering prize is an agreement with the United States, but that still feels a long way off. Joel Hills, News at 10.
Welsh lamb was on the menu last night at Downing Street, we hear, as the PM and his Aussie counterpart thrashed out the details of a UK-Australia trade deal. The nervousness amongst British farmers is that next time it could be Australian lamb. The Trade Secretary has insisted British farmers won't be hurt by the deal, and in truth compromises have been made that appear to keep the National Farmers Union broadly happy. There'll be tariff-free trade for all British goods, possibly a visa scheme allowing young Brits to travel to work in Oz. For farmers, we're expecting a 15-year cap on tariff-free imports. Well, Nick Watt has been looking at the details and he's at the wall. Nick.
Thanks, Emily. Well, smiles today in Downing Street. There we are, Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister. And the reason for those smiles on the UK side is this is the first free trade agreement negotiated from scratch since Brexit. Now, at the heart of this deal will be the elimination of tariffs on goods travelling in both directions. Now, what will this mean for our pockets? Well, the government says it will be a £34 million annual saving for British households, as we see the elimination of tariffs on Australian favourites such as Jacobs Creek wines. And the overall benefit to our economy, well, blink and you will miss it. It is an increase of between 0.01% to 0.02% of GDP over 15 years. Of course, the whole point of a trade deal, the government would say, is to do even better than that figure. Now, there are big fears amongst hill farmers here who have great concerns that they will simply not be able to compete with the industrial scale of farms in Australia. And so number 10 is saying they will be protected by a cap on tariff-free exports for 15 years. Now, Australia says to those hill farmers, have no fear. They say they haven't even filled their quotas in the EU market. That, of course, included us until last December. And look at this. This is a letter from the Australian High Commissioner to worried Conservative MPs talking about how Australia's production of beef and lamb is already at full capacity. And then he said that that beef and that lamb are either consumed domestically or exported to existing customers, mainly in the Pacific Rim. Now, that is a view echoed tonight by Australian farmers.
But that is right. There is well, not so much a shortage, but the supply is tight, and the markets that are in the Pacific, in Asia, are taking a lot of what we're producing. So I can absolutely assure anyone in the UK that sure, there might be some opportunities over there, but we don't think in any way that beef and lamb will flood the UK market as a result of this trade agreement. There may be some opportunities, but it will not be on the scale that will wipe out or to be the huge detriment to UK farmers in our view.
So what does this all mean for future UK trade deals? Because, of course, this trade deal will tell us what sort of deals we will pursue around the world. Which parts of our economy do we want to throw an arm around? Which areas less so? Now, Scottish crofters, well, they fear that they are not a priority.
Well, the real worry here is that this deal is setting a precedent for future deals to come. And we're particularly concerned about the deals with other large agricultural producing nations like New Zealand, South America, countries in North America as well, of course, the USA and Canada. Those countries, they're all going to be looking at this deal. They're going to be keeping a close eye on the detail, and they'll be looking to replicate that and get the same concessions for their own deals with the UK.
Now, those fears are shared by some Tory MPs in rural areas. Others see a bright future in the Pacific Rim for the UK. Here is the former Minister Robert Goodwill, who's also a farmer.
The advantages outweigh that in many ways. For example, a 5% tariff on British cars being exported. Well, you know, if we have more people working in the British car industry, that's more people with a wage packet and more people able to afford a steak and chips in the pub on a Friday night, which improves demand for British beef. So I think we need to look at this in the round. I think free trade is generally a good thing. Having this deal with Australia means that we may well be moving forward to the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which could well end up including the United States, and that's advantages, I think, for everyone.
I should say that Robert Goodwill did make clear he's a barley farmer, so he will benefit from the cut in tariffs on UK whisky exports. Emily.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining us now, Neil Parish, a farmer, Tory MP, chair of the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, and Mike Wood, Conservative MP, who's thrown his weight behind the trade deal. Neil, is Liz Truss right when she says that British farmers have nothing to fear from this?
I think the deal is a mixed one. I think overall it's great to have a trade deal with Australia. It's good to build up our relationship, across the world, especially with China becoming more powerful. So I think that is good. But I think from a farming perspective, we need to go in this with our eyes wide open, because we're being asked to go into a more environmental, a more animal welfare friendly situation, and we've got to be careful that those imports meet those high standards. So like I said, I'm a little bit concerned, but I think there are some safeguards in there. I would be happier if the Trade and Agriculture Commission was set up again within the Trade Department, so that can guide the Secretary of State for Trade as we move forward. So
just to understand.
Yes.
Sorry, Neil, just to understand, though, you think that those standards will be met. So you're expecting the government to insist that Australian meat or poultry or whatever will be the same standard as the UK?
I am. We've had those assurances all along. That's what the Trade and Agriculture Commission is for. And of course, also you've got to remember that a lot of Australian beef is finished off in a very intensive way. Much more in the UK are we sort of grass-fed and more extensive. So we've got to follow these things carefully. But I think we can take the competition, and I think we've then got to also make sure we're very aggressive in marketing and exporting our great British beef and lamb as well, in order, when you have trade deals, you get competition, and we accept that. But we've got to really get on the front foot, and we've got 10 years really to sort this out, and gradually more and more lamb and beef will come in from Australia, and we have to make sure that it meets those high standards that we've been promised the government will make in the trade deal. Because,
Mike Wood, a lot of farmers don't share Neil's optimism, that they think that there are much worse standards on the produce that's coming in from Australia, whether it's the chlorinated chicken or whether it's how pregnant sows are kept and raised together. And they think that that is going to put British farmers in a really difficult position because their food will be more expensive.
No, I don't think that's right. Things like chlorinated chicken or hormone-fed beef, they're illegal to put on sale in the UK. They'll remain illegal to put on sale in the UK. No trade deal can change that. It will need changing the law in the UK, which isn't going to happen. Like Neil, I've got every confidence in British farmers to be producing some of the best products in the world. And actually, we should be looking at how we can be exporting those products, because whilst they're certainly not always the cheapest, we can compete on quality with any other country in the world, and we're seeing that in markets in the Far East. And I think there's no reason why British farmers shouldn't actually be looking to export to Australia as part of this deal.
It is funny when you look at the numbers involved. I mean, courtesy of our business editor, who said you'll actually need 2,000 Australian free trade agreements to offset the impact on GDP of leaving the EU single market. We get to 0.02% in 15 years. It does seem to make a mockery of the choices this government has made.
I don't think so, Emily. I mean, I don't think we should downplay a trade deal with one of our oldest friends and partners. And of course, the significance of this is the very first trade deal negotiated from scratch with a country that the EU, despite our close historic and cultural links, the EU didn't have an agreement with at all. It is sending a clear signal that post-Brexit Britain sees its role out in the world, trading more widely, as has been said by Nicholas Watt earlier. We're looking now at the CPTPP agreement. That's 11 of some of the world's biggest and fastest growing economies.
And that's what farmers are worried about, isn't it? That it starts with Australia and then it becomes Canada and Brazil and Mexico and all the rest of it. So they've got an even bigger problem on their hands. Let me turn to you, Neil, because one of the suggestions is perhaps that this government is going to be less concerned with farming going forwards and more concerned with a sort of greener environmental idea of custodians of the land, that farming is quietly being sort of pushed out to the side in all this?
Yeah, what we've got to be careful of is not to drive farming in this country with very high costs and very high welfare standards. That's fine. But again, if you have imported food, it's got to meet those standards. So we must not be squeezed in both directions. Now, I think we can deal with it. I think we can get very much more support from government to export in order to mitigate some of the imports. But the high-end market, your steaks that come in from Australia, that's what will come in. The Asian market will absorb most of the carcass of the beef animal, but your high-end market will come here. We've got to expect competition, and farmers are up to it. But let's go into this deal with our eyes open. Let's be absolutely certain that the assurance that we've had from the Secretary of State and the government that we will maintain these high welfare standards will be maintained. Otherwise, you can't ask our farmers to produce food to higher and higher standards if you're going to allow imports that don't meet those standards. So I'm really keen, like I said, to make sure the Trade and Agriculture Commission is up and running to monitor what happens when we finally see the trade deal, because as we monitor it in Parliament, we only really see the final conclusions of the deal, and that's why it's important and it's negotiated strongly so that we know we have a decent deal when we're finished. And I will be supporting it, but I want to see the colour of the tariffs, the colour of the money, and make sure we're getting a fair deal.
Do you think you will? I mean, sorry to ask, but, you've already been up against this government and lost. You tabled the amendment which sought to protect UK farmers from cheap imported produce, and that failed. Now, you think you've got assurances on checks, you think you've got balances in place, but you've got nothing, actually, in legislation.
Yeah, I mean, what we got is we had the compromise in the end was with the Trade and Agriculture Commission to look at future trade deals, and they have reported. Now, what we press for is to make sure that those deals are done and that information is used. And the Secretary of State gave me the assurance, Liz Truss, that the whole idea of the Agriculture and Trade Commission was to follow those trade deals through. Now, I need to seek those assurances again, and I promise you, as it comes to Parliament, we will monitor it as a select committee chair. I mean, the committee will look at it. I also, guest in on the trade committee as well. So don't worry, I've had my eyes open. I'm watching very clearly, but there are times when one has to take these assurances. But I assure you, it's not just on face value. I will be looking at the detail as well.
Thank you both. Thanks for joining us.